All right, so again, Campbell, Ernest, and I, we kind of deal with varnish on a daily basis, so we kind of came up with this idea to do this lab. So this is going to be, like I said, it's going to be a little bit hands-on, a little bit through slides, and we're going to try to mix it up a little bit and get you involved. So.
Anyone else need a? Just share them around, copy the comments to your
Yep. And like I said, whoever ends up with the key last gets to keep it. So. So again, about us, you already heard about this, so we'll keep moving. So we wanted to start off with sort of like a survey of kind of where everybody's at. Who here has done a Vickle before in varnish? Anybody? Good, we got a couple. Awesome. Who here is familiar with like different layers of the Drupal stack? So Redis, Memcache, APC, those different caching layers? That's better. Okay, good. So we're in the right place. So the stuff I'm going to talk about is going to be very high-level overview. It's going to be more of architecture type things that we do as a hosting company and as someone working with Drupal a lot. We look at it from a system administration point of view. They look at it from a development point of view, so you're going to get kind of both sides of the coin. A couple overviews of technology that we use. I'm going to kind of go over some of the architecture, get you to install this virtual instance locally. Then we're going to go through and do basically Drupal and Varnish type setups, building a Vickle from scratch, or having some edge cases that we can show you, let you siege this on your VM that you have on your laptop, and then how to troubleshoot those and give some other examples. It looks weird on my computer. So basically, again, this is going to be an overview for some of you that are here, but I had to cover a lot, from ground up. So different life cycles of the HTTP protocol, right? So you can CDN cache, you can use Varnish as a CDN. Basically by doing that, you're allowing yourself to have this offloaded, and so Apache and Drupal aren't actually the things that are getting hit as hard. So you want these things to happen. You want these cache layers to happen. You want to do it in layers. So you don't want just to have one thing being your end-all be-all of your caching. SSL offload presents a way to cache your SSL traffic. You can basically put something in front that terminates your SSL, pushes that into Varnish or pushes that into something else, and then you can cache it at that level as well. So you can get around your SSL issues. Load balancing out that traffic, make sure it goes to multiple webheads. Just using Varnish in general. Obviously the Apache stuff that is there. We're not going to get into holy war of who uses Nginx versus Apache versus Lite versus all those things. But we'll kind of talk about different things that you can do to make those things go faster. Highly available solutions, again, using load balancers, offloading, just trying to keep things load balanced, whether you use Varnish for a load balancer or whether you use something else like IPVS or Pound or something like that. So the biggest problem that you have is as you add more modules, things get slower, right? So sometimes you can't avoid this. So how do you get around it? You try to cache as much as you possibly can on the front end. So, or in the mid tiers. So some things that people try to use is Memcache or Redis to cache out the database tier. So this is, again, the caching in tiers. So while you have Varnish in the front, you're also doing caching at APC and Memcache in the center for PHP. And then you also have, basically caching going on inside the database as well. So in the case of MySQL, typically most people, this is the most common thing that we find is you want to turn off your query cache if you're using something MySQL 5.5 or higher. It generally hurts you. Do the caching in Memcache. Do it in Redis. Do it somewhere else. Don't do it in MySQL. It slows down things. It actually does I/O waits a lot more. And make sure you're using NODB buffer pools as well. If you want to use MySQL for caches, you can do that for your cache tables. There are some performance increases there, but if you want to just use NODB across the board, that's probably the best thing to do. So an optimization approach. So not this means don't look at the very small things. Don't go for the very small little problems that you see. Like, don't go for the things that are going to save you a millisecond. Go for the things that are going to save you a second or 2 seconds of optimization. So you want to basically optimize from the bottom up. The HTTP stack is so dense in a Drupal stack that you have so many places you can actually cache. So Varnish is just one piece, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about a lot today. As we call in the office, play chase the bottleneck. You always want to go after the largest bottleneck you have. Most of the time, it is either there's some function that you can find with XHProf, or there's something that is causing, it's missing memcache or Redis because it's too large, and it's slipping past and you think it's being caught. Those types of things you have to go and look at, and you have to basically put instruments in place in order to go and find those things. So either use things like Apache Top or MySQL Top or MySQL Bench, Varnish Top. There's different tools, and we'll get into a lot of those here in a little bit. So just again, MySQL basics, use MySQL 5.6, 5.5. Do not use 5.1. 5.5 NO default is 1,000 times better than NO in 5.1. 5.6, again, the same thing. They continue to make more and more improvements. If you want an alternative, go to MariaDB. 10 or above is equivalent. Actually, in most cases, it's faster. It's a drop-in replacement. It works great. Again, use NO. Couple things that most people forget to look at is like NOB buffer pool, the log file, flushing. Those all have to be set properly. If you're hitting the top of your log NOB buffer pool and it can't cache any more tables, then you're basically hitting the top of your cache and it's going to break. So that's what your tools have to instrument for. And then other things that you may want to look at, but they're on a per connection basis typically, or per application basis, is like file per table, things of that nature. So I'm not going to go through all these just because it's not really the theme of this, but more one to get it out there is there's a ton of ways to make MySQL scale. Tungsten, you can use master replication, you can do read slaves, on and on. So Memcache and Redis, who here has worked with Redis before? Anybody? Good. Use it if you're not, because it's actually a really good tool. It survives reboots, so you don't have to worry about your caches getting corrupt and basically flushed. There's a lot of compatibility with basically D8's actually starting to write a lot of stuff in for that as well. D7, you have a couple modules that'll use it. Again, back to what we were saying before, slim is better. So turn off as much stuff as you can, make it as clean as you possibly can, and continue to try to not have to cache as much as you can, because the less data you're pushing out, or the less overhead you have, the less you're going to need to have caching on the front be aggressive. If you're still using D6, God help you, but use PressFlow. If you're using D7 or newer, you can use PressFlow, but honestly, most of the time, most people don't. And again, just to kind of round out the whole architecture, use Solr where you can for search. Don't use Drupal search. So on the HTTP stack, we have Apache 2.4. That's use that because 2.2 is obviously it's getting older. If you can use 2.4, do it. If you have really resource constrained servers, then consider doing horizontally scaled virtual instances. Mod PHP is still kind of the gold standard for us. There's a lot of people that use Nginx, but we're seeing that as scale goes up, especially if you put Varnish in front of it, it doesn't really matter if you have Nginx behind it or Apache. Allow override thing, basically it saves you a couple steps of Apache processing. So again, it's all about just getting as much as you can out of your stack. And again, do we care what web server we're running? Probably not. So with Varnish, basically, the trick is what's Varnish doing? Varnish has pretty much been kind of the gold standard again of making Drupal issues disappear. So as you have problems with your page load times, you have a hideous query that's running and it takes forever. How do you hide that? Well, you only run it once every 5 minutes or something like that, and you basically have TTLs in place to query basically cache all those queries. Things you have to look for, make sure your H headers are set correctly so that you have the time to live on your cache set. If it's not, then you're probably going to hit your back end more frequently, and then you're basically going to have more load on your back end. Same thing with cookies. Make sure that it is actually getting hit instead of missed. Go through your VICL over and over again. That's the important part. If you're using mod security, which some people are, if you're using mod security, which some people do, there's actually a Varnish replacement for mod security. You can run it completely in Varnish. So now you can basically put host-based IDP, or intrusion detection, or cross-site scripting, hacking, all that stuff can be pushed into Varnish now. So you can actually go through and filter all those bad things out before they even hit your application at all. So if you're concerned about security, or if you're having compliance issues, things of that nature, that's probably someplace you want to go look. Let's see here. So enough about the slides. So who here has run VirtualBox before? Awesome, that's good. This is gonna be, I was concerned about that. All right, so this VM I basically built, it was on this DVD. It is, I have the installers for OS X and Windows as well, so if you have those already on there, great. Takes 2 gigs of memory, 4 gigs of disk space, so make sure you have that. Make sure you have virtualization support, obviously, in your CPU. And then obviously Bravery helps because this is you're gonna break it, and you're gonna break it hard. It's not gonna break your laptop, it'll break the VM. So if you don't wanna do this, obviously you can follow along with us as well. We'll be doing it up here on this stage as well. Okay. So the USB keys and the DVDs I gave out, if you copy that whole DVD over onto your desktop, the installers are in the VirtualBox directory. So go ahead and install that. If you want the Windows, there's obviously a Windows one and there's also the OS X one. If you're running a really old version, I'd recommend upgrading onto this version. Who here doesn't have a DVD or a USB key that needs one? Anybody? All right, back there. What do you need? A USB key? Does anybody have a spare USB key? It's up here in front. Cool.
So while people are copying things over still, and definitely share those USB keys around. Jason, I know you just threw out a ton of different acronyms, and that was a lot of information very quickly. So this is a good time for anybody to say, what was that? What is Varnish? What is, if you have any questions, does all of this make sense to everybody? That was very fast for me. I'm quite impressed if everybody.
Well, just in theory. I mean, I've never worked with any of these tools, so I just know in theory what everything does. And I probably lost a couple of acronyms.
Awesome. All right. Well, if anyone can remember any of the acronyms to ask about, I know Jason is very good at explaining them, but this we're about to go through this in practice and actually set this all up together. Most of this is now head cold. I almost just feel like shit. I have no idea how hot these
All
are.
right, so after you get installed, or actually after you get installed, there's a Varnish 101 directory in there as well. Just go in that directory, unzip that file, the v3 file, and it's going to explode out to about 3 gigs or so. That is going to, and then inside of there, there's going to be a CentOS 6.4 VBox. So once you get that, just right-click on it. In Mac, I know you can right-click on it and say Open With, and then VBox. I think it's vManager Start. I think it is. In Windows, it's probably much the same thing. So raise your hands if you have problems getting that started, and then we can come around and help you as well. So in the meantime, so acronyms. So there's a lot of them in there. Anybody have any initial questions on what I was talking about up there? Because we're going to go through some of this stuff. Not so much the Redis, but we actually did something with Memcache instead. Go for it.
About the saving of query cache on MySQL.
Yep.
Do you have any numbers? What's the
So typically we're seeing, so the problem with the query cache in MySQL is that it causes it to actually go to disk. Even though once memory fills up, the buffer in the memory fills up, it starts using disk, so there's seeks that happen. With Redis and Memcache, you don't have that because it's all in memory at that point. So we're seeing typically on a highly loaded site, we see, I think we're actually going to show you here. We go from like 10 to like 40 simultaneous connections on just this little VM. So about a 4 times increase, roughly. So that's kind of how we, you're going to see that as soon as we do this in practice a little bit too. Yep, go for it. It should.
Show of hands, who's already got this set up and running? All right, good. Talk amongst yourselves. Wrong generation. Nobody gets my humor. Too old for this crap. Well, there's that too. I'm very interested to see. Yeah, this is pretty good. If this is working for everyone. Thank you, Black Mesh. Well, they just had one. But all right, well, let's find a good stopping spot in mine. Oh yeah, mine's totally gonna be the longest. But it's because mine's got all the practical stuff. Awesome, thank you. Anybody need a USB key? I'm not gonna throw it, but Ernest is gonna run. Oh. All right, anybody in the other side of the room need a USB key so we can make Ernest comically run over there? I'm kind of disappointed. Yeah. That's coming up in the next set of slides, but the login is root. Password is varnish101, all lowercase. So I guess 101.
Okay, if you have it started, that want to have it started, raise your hand. Awesome.
And everyone who's got it already on their
Yeah.
on their machine and running?
Yeah. Cool. Cool.
Anyone who's not listening?
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So this is you actually. So
Oh.
come on over. You have a type of charger, yeah?
Yeah.
If you're having issues, just raise your hand. I'll come up and help you.
No,
All right,
actually
cool.
don't have this kind of charger. Oh, which one is it? Oh no. Jason, I think oh, thank you. All right, is everyone ready to get going with the practical side of this? That was a lot of information very fast. Okay, so I want to stress that I want you to interrupt me with questions and theoretical situations, and I really like hearing things like, but this is going to fall over when somebody does X, Y, and Z. And hopefully half the time I'll get to say, yeah, just give me 2 slides and we'll get there. But I really want this to be more interactive than just a session talk. If we do 2 hours and 15 minutes of just us up here talking, I'm going to fall asleep. Like, I don't know about you guys. All right, so in this virtual box, we've got CentOS 6. We tried to set it up so you won't have to download anything because conference internet. We've already given you the username and password for root. The Drupal install on there has username and password admin. Very simple. We've tried to make sure that everything is installed with at least close to the normal configuration that you'll get out of the box when you just do yum install whatever the package name is. As we go through and we customize the configs, we've actually left copies of our customized configs in root's home directory. You can see in root stuff. And the Drupal site that's on there has about 16,000 nodes, give or take, which is going to be really fun coming up. So the username is root, password is varnish101 or 101. I'm so happy somebody got this. I wasn't sure if people were going to get that or not. And I was ready with a song and dance about it's a drush in a box, but yeah. Right. So just some information so you don't have to poke around. You may have already figured this out. We have Apache serving Drupal from var www HTML on port 80. That's mapped to port 2280 on your local host. So from your actual OS X or Windows browser, you can access localhost colon 2280 to see the Apache version of things. We have Varnish. I think by default it's actually not running yet, but it will be running on port 8080, which is 2288 on your local host. We've already got Memcache and APC downloaded and installed, and there's a ton of disabled Drupal modules. Basically anything I could think of that you guys were going to ask us about or that we were going to tell you about. So with questions, we can all enable these things and hammer our own sites and see how this works. All right. So I just want to make sure that everybody can access their local through Firefox, whatever browser you use. Has anybody got any trouble opening up a web browser or going to localhost 2280? One person? Two people? You're the only one who can't get the whole thing started. I'm sorry. The port here. In fact, what I'm going to do, if I switch up to Firefox, is which? Yes, but they'll be available after the talk. And also the whole thing, apparently the whole thing gets videoed. So if you ask a dumb question, it gets preserved forever. This is what it should look like when you're starting your VM. Anybody else having trouble or having questions so far while I wait for this to boot? Go ahead.
All kinds of colors in my prompts. Red and blue, I can't read them. How do you turn off colors?
Edit dot, it'll be in bash rc, I think, or it'll be, I may have it somewhere similar. We'll just have a look right now. I like colors. Here, you can see what I've got up on the screen. Color prompt, just disable that. I actually don't like the colors that it does in VirtualBox either, so I'm going to SSH in. I'm sorry? All right, mostly everyone is with us so far. We can all access the site in our browser. Yep. You're on a Mac? The left option key immediately beside your space bar, and I think tab will take it out.
Which was the Drupal admin password?
Drupal is admin and admin. It's good. I'm expecting to take some time for this, so it's not a problem. Oh, here's the slide that I was supposed to leave up while you guys were doing this, so I didn't have to answer those questions over and over again. So even just clicking around through your browser, you'll find that the site feels reasonably... Actually, show of hands, who finds that the site feels reasonably snappy? Yeah, mine too. Actually, the first time I did it, I'm going, this performs way better than it does on Amazon. This is when I'm supposed to put in a pitch for black mesh rather than AWS, but that's just because you've only got one user, and we're about to crush that. So let's figure out what the limits are. By default, right now, Drupal isn't caching anything out of the box. We have actually one reasonably heavy view that you can see is in the main menu at /heavy. So we're going to use a tool that's called Apache Bench. How many of you guys have used Apache Bench before? Oh, thank goodness. All right, good. So these commands are going to be reasonably familiar to you. This is about the simplest version of an Apache Bench attack. We have another question?
Yeah, you said to say when. That is not a session, so
Correct.
siege with a cookie something.
Yep, that's coming. That's definitely coming. The simplest thing is just to do it completely anonymous with no cookies or anything like that. So, this is the way an Apache Bench command works. Is this news for anyone? All right. Very quickly, you can see what the arguments are to Apache Bench. We have concurrency, means how many requests get submitted at the same time. Number is the total number, and the target URL is pretty reasonable. I want you guys to play around with the concurrency and the number. How high do you have to get the values to break it? Hands up and let me know. How high do you have to get it to actually make the site stop giving you responses? I would love it if you would kill the virtual machine. That would be actually perfect. It's exactly what I'm looking for right now. Does a concurrency of 50 do it for everyone? Mine seems to do all right. Apple engineering. Does everybody get response times like this? I was actually quite curious about this, that I get... Let me make sure about that. Yeah. Yep. Yep, back up a couple slides. That's totally fine. All right, does anybody need this information still, or can I move on from this slide? You're supposed to run? Yes, please. Otherwise, you will bring down your own laptop. Which would also be kind of fun, but I mentioned this is preserved on video. So this is where you have to be really aware of which environment you are submitting commands on. From your laptop, you will need to use port 2280. From the VM, you can just use port 80. Yeah, because my expectation is that you're running your browser from your laptop and not from inside the VM. Yeah. 2288 is probably varnish is turned off still. We'll turn it on in a minute.
Maybe if I switch from NAT to bridge network, because from NAT I cannot connect from the virtual machine, from the virtual node.
I'm going to step in and help people because I think we still have some trouble. So talk amongst yourselves.
If you're not familiar with VirtualBox and then you could lose your mouse, then on a Mac you hit the left command key. I think in Windows, I think it's the left shift key, so you can get it back. Right shift key. Okay, thank you.
So some people are having a hard time connecting with their browser if they're using Chrome. Try using Firefox. Apparently it works well with Safari. I'm not going to mention that. Apparently it also works well in Internet Explorer. But if you're using Internet Explorer, I mentioned this is videoed for posterity, right? All right, I'm going to advance the slides now. If you haven't written this information down yet, I don't know, there's a quiz later. So this is the Apache bench command that I'd like you to run. This one should be run from inside the VM, which means your prompt will have that red load me in front of it. You can actually just hit the front page if you haven't had a look at what the heavy view is like. It's up to you. Has everyone gotten this far with us so far? Mm-hmm. Oh, one request in 3 seconds? Yep, that sounds like you're hitting the heavy view. Yes. To the cartoon? Here, at least while we're answering questions. Okay. All right, questions? Yeah, that's a really good point, especially if you're just hitting the front page. Yep. Are you running it on heavy or on? Try against the front page so you'll get, yeah. Okay. So this is a view that displays, somebody check it for me, but I think it tries to load 200 nodes at once. Maybe it tries to load 600 nodes, I forget. I mean, I wanted something that would break it. This is actually not quite as unrealistic a situation as it might seem. Actually, last week I was dealing with exactly this, but as putting the nodes on a map. And we had 600 objects to load. It actually had to load them up along with taxonomy, so that makes 1,200 objects to load, and then render in Geo. And that's, you know what, that's just a lot of work, no matter what.
I've got the same issue. I've got to render all the site users for each account to 10,000.
Yeah.
Not fun.
Yeah, 10,000 users at once.
Yep. With all have their geo fields, and I have to present it in open layers, and it's just
Open layers is going to have a really hard time with 10,000. Well, maybe with points it'll be all right, but maybe.
the front end stuff is fine
Yeah.
because it condenses everything to points. But in order to load like
No, just rendering it is hard.
entities and all the
It's worse with shapes, I have to say.
Yeah, does everybody get to the AB part?
Is it all right for me to take away this slide? I'm going to show you what my output from AB looks like. All right, good. Oops. I'm just going to do this on the front page so you can see what a reasonably normal output is. So you can see that it walks you through and says, okay, well, I'm not completely hanging. It gives you feedback as it goes through. And then it gives you a nice detailed feedback of the statistics of absolutely everything. In fact, when I'm doing proper load testing for a client and trying to develop an architecture for them, you spend a lot of time copying and pasting from here into spreadsheets. So total time took 13 seconds. That's fine. 500 requests complete. Nothing failed. There are no errors, which is nice to know. The average request per second, more or less, is going to be, it's about 30 requests a second. And you can see the way this breaks down in percentile. Something great to graph, actually, if you're a graphing kind of nerd. And if I am going to try this against that heavy view, actually we'll probably be here for a while, or we're going to start seeing a few errors, because that view should take 10 seconds or so every time it wants to load. So the number that I'm going to ask you to pay attention to here is requests per second. It's not that the other numbers aren't valuable, but they're the easiest quick metric for how to see how you're performing. Also bear in mind that number of requests, the reason we have concurrency and total number that we can set in A/B is because processes also have some overhead in starting up and shutting down. And the difference between having 100 total and 1,000 total is that those kind of little overheads really start to add up. It's why in practice, you're not actually going to get 37 page loads per second out of this in any kind of a consistent way. You could get a burst up to 37 a second, but if you have 37 a second all afternoon, it's going to die. Yeah, I haven't even gotten through 100 requests. I'm just going to Control-C out of this. Does it tell us how many complete requests? Oh, it made it through 60. That's pretty impressive. It's better than I was expecting. All right. So this is when you're supposed to do it. So what A/B values do you need to bring your site down on the front page? Can you guys just call them out? You don't need to put up your hands. 300, concurrency 300 or total number? 300? Anybody manage to get higher? 300, what are you running on?
Can I have that virtual instance?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're going to improve this. And we're going to improve this using some stupidly simple methods at first, and we're going to go down the rabbit hole as far as we dare, as far as we have time for. So this is my personal mental model of how Drupal loads pages. This is quite a simplistic approach, and that's okay for what we are trying to do. So actually, the way I usually talk about this, every instance of the word data, I just say shit is loaded because that seems more natural to me. So shit is loaded from the database. Shit is rendered in its first little pieces of the page. Drupal actually renders everything in quite a granular way. So it will start, if you're rendering a view, for example, it would do each individual field and then each individual row of the table and then a whole table. Finally, when all of the page elements have been rendered, it assembles them in HTML. That's most of the work of the theming layer, and then we deliver it to the client browser. That's more or less the total package. And anything that we're going to optimize is going to be about speeding up one or more of these steps, or actually speeding up the arrows in between. This model is simple enough that my mother understood it, but does anybody have any questions? You should be embarrassed if you have questions about this part. All right. So we're going to start with the best practices setup. I really like this Dilbert. Can everybody read it from where they are? Because I do an excellent screen reader impersonation. Right. There's some truth to this, that any best practices is going to be a mediocre setup. It's not the perfect optimization. In every individual site, there are ways that you're going to be able to eke out extra 10, 15%, even if you're really going to tweak things into detail. There's a whole universe of tweaking in Redis and Memcache and APC, and even the way Drupal does its cache bins. But as Jason was saying, we're not really interested in chasing those kind of small issues. What we really want are the big best practices that are going to work for 95% of your sites and are going to get it to a state where it's really fast and certainly fast enough. That's right. So this should be a baseline. So, yeah.
Could you please tell me where you SSH which port on local?
If you're coming from your computer, it's port 2222. And I can never remember if it's lowercase p or uppercase p.
It's lowercase.
But it's the opposite for SCP because
That's correct. That's capital. Because that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Because we're a little bit masochistic in the sysadmin world. So this is a best practices setup in a broad kind of sense. We have Drupal running all of its own internal caching. You have APC configured, you have Memcache configured, you have Varnish installed and enabled. Has everybody here done this level of caching before? That's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to leave you guys to walk through that, but I'm going to do it at the same time so people can follow along. I love these kind of questions. All right, we're going to do this actually at the same time as people are talking. We're going to talk about this actually as people are doing this best practices setup. I'd like everyone who knows how to do this. We've already got APC installed and set up with the SHM size, so you don't have to worry about that. You are going to have to start the Memcache daemon, and don't worry if you don't know how to do any of this yet. I'm about to do it on the screen live so you can follow along. And I'm going to explain what you're doing. And then that's a really excellent question. It's very hard to come to an absolute, this is the right way to do it in caching. In almost every situation, your mileage may vary, and there are tweaks, and there are different ways of approaching the same problem. In fact, we're going to get to that when Ernest starts talking. Though we will have already addressed a bunch of load problems, you'll see the way Economist does it may not be exactly the same way that we do it. And that doesn't mean that we're wrong or Economist is wrong. It's that this is actually quite a complicated problem set, and there are multiple workable solutions. There isn't a concrete if-then kind of way to approach this. You really do have to understand and use our mental model. All right, so I'm going to start enabling things here. Everyone ready? Oops. Well, sure. So we'll start from where you're logged in on the virtual machine, and we have to start the Memcache service. Memcache is its own program that runs on its own and communicates with Drupal over a port or a socket. So we have to say service Memcache, because it's a daemon, start. Everybody with me so far? Now I'm logged into the site already as admin. I'm just going to make sure to enable every kind of caching I can think of. It is helpful to set an expiration for cache pages, no matter how small it is. Basically enable everything. Everybody know where to find this administrative screen?
What was the login for
Admin. Should have tried it before you asked. All right. It is important with most caching modules to actually enable them through the graphical interface, because PHP runs in separate processes on the command line versus through Apache or Nginx or whatever you're using. And it's really easy to get into some odd and awkward problems where you think modules were enabled and they weren't. We'll turn this on too. Yes, please. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. Well, let me wait for it to load. So, what is it for? All right, so we've got the APC service available to us. We've got the APC module compiled into PHP or in as a module. It is available to us. The same way we've got Memcache, the program, running. These modules enable Drupal to actually use these in an active way. APC does some clever things in a generic way with PHP. No matter what, it will speed you up a little bit. This is going to enable us to actually tell Drupal specifically, I want you to put menu cache into APC. I want you to put just the block cache, but not the page cache. And just, you know, things like that. Man, you've got the good questions. All right, so both of them are key, or what we call key value stores, where you have a key like a, we'll say, page cache and then a unique ID for that, and then we have the value of it. The biggest difference is the way it operates. In fact, APC is closer to PHP because it's actually compiled in or in a PHP module. You get a lot faster responses with it. It is not as good at handling large objects, and it's a bit more expensive on cache clears. And in fact, in certain configurations, APC will reserve memory with each separate process you have running. HTTP or Nginx or FastCGI will spin up a lot of processes. So they both can do very similar things, but they are optimized for different situations.
And what situation should I use APC instead of Memcache? Because we are using Memcache.
Sorry, because you're using? Yeah. Generally, you want to have both of them available. It's not going to be a huge speed up, but because it's not a difficult thing to do, it's a bit of a freebie. Memcache I use for larger objects or any time that you have to share the cache between more than one server. If you have a load balancer and multiple webheads behind it, you really can't make use of APC because the cache is on the individual box. Yes? That's an excellent idea. Could I repeat the questions so that everyone knows what it is? All right. Is everyone with me so far on what we've enabled? What's going on? Yes, so we've enabled APC, which, just to make it difficult to use module filter, the module title is Alternative PHP Cache. Yes, that's correct. And you don't need to have Memcache admin enabled, but it provides some handy tools for us when we're debugging. If we go to the status report for the site, we can see now Drupal is reasonably aware of APC. And Memcache, it's going to complain that Memcache integration is not currently loaded. This is because there's more to including a caching system than just enabling a module. You actually have to make some modifications to your settings.php. Let me make sure that I don't have a slide about that first before I go and actually do it. No, I don't have a slide about that. Awesome. Right. So, everyone sees and understands what I'm doing here? This is a lot. I have a lot less authority standing like this. Okay, I'm going to go right down to the bottom of settings.php. It doesn't actually matter, but it's nice to keep all of this stuff organized. And in fact, I'm going to give you guys the big cheat sheet is that there is a README in each of these caching modules that has the lines you need to add. There's a little typo in APCs, but I'll show you that. And in fact, I check it every time just to make sure that I'm not doing something stupid. So I'm going to log in a separate terminal just so I can have the readmes open in one place and paste them into settings.php in another. Everyone sees and understands? We're just going to look at a readme in a different tab. They give you a nice general use case, recommended use case for APC. We can customize this a little bit, but we don't have to do too much. So this is my one issue with APC's README. The way this works does everybody here understand PHP reasonably enough for me to talk about things like arrays? You know what? You never know. No? No, it's totally fair. If you're a system administrator, there's a lot of the stuff that you can be willfully ignorant of. Yes? I'm sorry? Yeah, the README file is in the modules root directory. So this is for APC. So the way this works is we have an array of all of the available caching mechanisms, and we want to set up this array in settings.php so that Drupal can be aware of it as early in the bootstrap process as possible. This is because the whole point of caching is saving yourself from having to load extra bits of Drupal that you don't need to load, right? We want to make this lightweight. There's nothing wrong with this PHP for syntax. The problem is that it will blow away any existing cache backends you've already got. So actually, the way this should look is like this. Oops. Can everybody read that?
Oop, careful.
Film for posterity.
Nice save.
All the grace and splendor of a ballerina breaking her leg. Sorry? Yes. So the important part is to remove the array and its round brackets, and to add these two square brackets at the end here. Does everybody have this? No, it looks like people are still tapping away. It's good.
Is there any other editor than VI on this install?
You can do Yum install Nano if you like Nano.
You know, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, sorry, we're VM guys. So, yeah, if you just type yum, Y-U-M, space install, space nano, N-A-N-O, that'll put a Pico style editor on there.
I don't even think about that.
Near
All right,
the
if you
dot.
don't know how to use Vi, that is worth learning how to do. It's
Yeah.
the one thing that's available on every system.
As long as you don't say Emacs, then I'm good to go.
Yeah, I get violent with Emacs.
So that's two things now: the keyboard and Nano.
What's that?
The keyboard settings and Nano.
I didn't even think about keyboard
Yeah,
settings.
near die.
You know, it's kind of embarrassing. I live in Germany, and I have never learned to type on a German layout keyboard. So, like, I buy my computers in Germany. They have the German layout written on them, and I just tell the machines that it's a U.S. layout. Drives my wife crazy. Yeah, he used to do that with a Dvorak layout, actually. Then no one can use it but you. All right, if the internet is down, if the internet is not, is the internet down? Can you get somebody tell me? Oh, it's up, okay.
It is DrupalCon, you never know.
I know.
Yeah.
I have a theory that the amount of bandwidth we use rises to meet however much bandwidth they provide. If they gave each of us a fiber line, we'd all be torrenting.
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't, I'd be using your bandwidth.
Oh,
Out of Nano?
yeah, Control X.
Oh, heck.
And
screw it.
then
I don't-
make sure
I
you
don't want Nano
save.
on here. All right, I'm switching back so everyone can see what we need to have in settings.php. So I'm going to explain what these commands do here. The first one says, here's our array in cache backends. You want to include this file, Drupal APC cache.inc. You can see by the path to it, it's provided by the APC module. In fact, I'm going to add a little line in here to keep this clear. And then below here, what we're doing is setting a couple of cache bins to go to APC. Yep. That better? So Drupal, PressFlow and Drupal 7 have a concept of cache bins. That means we don't just have one thing that's the global cache cache glom. Instead, we can divide it up into different kinds of caches. And you can specify where Drupal is going to store each kind of cache. So you can see, oh good, it still works. You can see that here we're saying, okay, the Bootstrap cache goes to Drupal APC cache. The class cache, which is keeping track of the PHP classes, goes to Drupal APC cache. These are both good ones to put in APC because the cache is accessed frequently and it's small. Anything that you can think of that is going to meet those two, is a really good candidate for APC. It's also worthwhile considering APC is not great about flushing its cache, so it's nice if it's a cache that's not going to have to change too often. Is everyone with me so far? We're going to do the same thing with memcache. Just exactly the same thing that we did. Yep. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me just have a look. So the question is, why do we, in the APC README, there's step 2A and 2B, depending on what you've got. What does it say for why? I'm not sure why you would not cache Bootstrap in there. Yeah. Oh, this is to do with the amount of memory that you've got.
Yeah, it's
actually the big difference. The difference is not that Bootstrap is not included. The difference is that we have this one, cache default class. Cache default class means this is the default. If it's a cache, put it in here unless it's specified otherwise. So if you have a lot of memory for APC, and especially if you don't have other caching systems, this is a reasonable setup. I never do it this way. I wouldn't give you a hard time. I've mentioned a couple times APC is not great about clearing its cache. It's a bit slow. And so what happens is when the memcache cache fills up, it wipes the whole thing and then starts caching it again. And those operations are expensive. So if your APC cache is too small, it actually is going to slow down your site to have APC enabled. The relevant setting here, we actually set for you. It is in /etc php.d apc.ini. I will show you where it is. It's this setting here, APC SHM size. And for most situations, 128 megs is sufficient. Question at the back? Depends on it depends on the size of your server and your particular configuration. In this case, we don't have the problem where each process takes up its own block of shared memory. So you could, if you wanted to cache your entire Drupal installation in here, put page cache in here, then I would probably set it as a gig, I guess. Any good reason not to do that?
Yeah.
What's the good reason not to do that?
I mean APC, because it's basically compiling this stuff into bytecode, and you're doing this. It depends what settings you have in here, but there's times that this cache is going to become stale, and whenever you actually put all that stuff in there, you're going to want to put stuff in there that's you know, you're going to have settings that's going to clear that whenever that changes, and that bytecode is going to change, and then it has to recompile it. Generally, what you're going to see is you'd rather do those operations inside of memcache, where it's going to automatically clean those things for you, where APC isn't going to do that for you. So, I mean, generally, whenever you're doing these types of things, just the Drupal Bootstrap stuff, just the PHP bytecode that's going to be compiled out of just normal PHP operations is what you want to focus on here. And then use other tools and things that you can afford to have the socket connection going between Drupal and memcache, for instance, or Redis, and then have that in the back end actually manage those things for you, because then you can isolate those out as well. Because you can create different buckets of memcache to create different, let's say you have a multi-site setup, you can create 10 memcache buckets and have each site be in a different bucket, for instance. Where APC, you can't do that. You can't do that kind of isolation. It's all or nothing.
Okay, now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the settings that we get out of the memcache module for Drupal. The only difference is they're in installation.txt. It's very complicated to find. They actually are nice, and they include instructions for installing memcache. What we really want... Wait, where is it?
Yeah, it's in the README.
Is it? Did I just skip over it? Oh yeah, here we are. You're right, it is in README. So there are 3 lines that there are 2 lines that we need to have here. One of them is this same include that just says we have memcache available as a cache backend. The other one that we need to have, oops, I forget I have to do this through my mouse. The other one that we need to have is actually one of the configurations here for a cache bin. This is the form cache, and it cannot be in memcache. Can anybody tell me why? Say again? It's not a cache? Can you explain that a little bit more? Right. So he says it's not a cache, it's actually state storage. The other way to say this is the problem is that the form cache actually stores the state of forms in progress, and God forbid your cache gets cleared in the middle of that. Someone's in the middle of signing up for a user account and you have to clear a cache, they're going to lose everything that they've submitted in their forms. The forms cache has to be somewhere that's what we call non-volatile storage, something that will survive a reboot, will survive somebody coming and kicking your server. So we put it in the database cache. There are other places that can be persistent, but the database cache tends to be fine. This is not a big one for performance. The other option that they recommend for us to include in README is this one, cache default class. Now we saw this a moment ago. We saw this a moment ago with APC, where they said, yeah, if you have a huge APC memory, you can say the cache default class should be here. Memcache is actually a more reasonable place to have your default cache. And again, this just means that if it's a cache and Drupal isn't sure where to put it in memcache. I'm going to step out of the way and let people copy this down now. But are there questions about what we've got so far? Has everybody already copied this in? That is a great question. Was it a leading question? Do you know the answer is a good one? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Do we have any cookies or gold stars? That was awesome.
USB keys.
Yeah, you get a USB key with a VM on it, but it doesn't have nano. Right, so we mentioned that these are both key value stores. It means that there is, I'm just going to do this so I can be out of the way. It means that there is a key and a value to it. It's like having a field name and then a value that's stored in there. And if you have 2 Drupal sites that are using the same memcache install, then there are going to be 2 Drupal sites that say this is what the front page looks like, for example, or that this is what the bootstrap looks like, and it's not going to be accurate. There is an option for having a prefix applied to all of those cache keys for memcache. Actually, the prefixing option is different for each caching module that you use. It's another one that I can never remember. Prefixing. Here we go. Memcache key prefix. So you will need to have something unique stored in the memcache key prefix. This is only an issue if you have multiple sites running on one server. Do you guys need to see how we put this into settings PHP? Yes. All right.
Is that open with APC as well?
Yes, it is, and APC has a separate, the most recent versions of APC have a different command, a different variable to set it. Actually, and it's, when you have this prefixing problem, it's one of the more frustrating things to solve if you haven't seen it before. Because all of a sudden it's things like menus disappear. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cache memory is still shared. Unless you're one of the, FastCGI still has the issue where it's set, the memory for APC is separate per process.
Yeah.
In that case, it shouldn't be an issue. So you only need to set this key prefixing when you have multiple sites that are going to be sharing the same memcache installation. And this can be absolutely anything, as long as it's unique. Correct. All right, I'm going to get rid of this because I actually don't like the prefix. It makes it harder for me to read the logs. All right, we ready to move on? We're going to test this again. Everyone's got it all copied down? Man, the quiz at the end is going to be awesome. Default cache. No. Most of that you don't have to worry about. The default is fine. Memcache operates on port, what is it, 11211.
Yep.
And the Drupal module uses that by default.
Okay to put all my caches from all sites running from the server into one page, one port, or
Yes, you can't put it all into one. Sorry, the question was, is it okay to have all of my sites caching to the same memcache instance running on the same port? And the answer is yes, as long as they are prefixed. Memcache won't care. You just need to make sure you have enough memory available for it.
Right, and generally, whenever you want to do something like, let's say you have a really heavily loaded site, you'll create another bin for just that site because it's going to really beat the snot out of that cache. So you want to separate that out, isolate it, so that it becomes its own process. Because then Unix is looking at it as its own process. You can actually give it more resources. Run it on a different box. You can isolate that out that way too.
All right, we all ready for me to go back to the slides? We're gonna hit Apache Bench again. We're gonna see the improvement that we've got. That's right. This is actually the other part, is to explain what it was we were doing. So again, our best practice is setup. So the first thing, data is loaded from the database. Now it's actually coming from memcache, which is way faster in most cases. It's way faster in all cases, but it's going to be coming from memcache in most cases. We're using APC to speed up all of the blue arrows. And we've enabled Drupal's generic page cache, which right now is going into memcache, so that actually whenever possible, it's going to just keep a copy of the finished HTML page and hand that out. So we don't even need to care about the blue arrows or or how fast it's coming from the database. Because we set memcache as the default, really we've got memcache all over the place. All right, here comes did I miss anything? No. Here comes your second local denial of service. So let's try the exact same commands that you did before.
Thanks.
You'll find that you can raise the numbers a lot higher now, and in fact, you'll get, because the numbers returned from AB are averages, the higher the number is, the better. And I'm going to run this myself. Actually, first I'm going to check status, because with all the questions, I'm not sure that I remember to do everything. Excellent. So can everybody see the difference in what you get out of AB for this? I don't remember. What did I get last time? I got 27 requests per second?
Roughly.
38, yeah, somewhere around there, which is, I have to say, pretty good. And now we're up to 250, 246. And that's the first time was loading it into cache. If we do it again, we'll find it's actually the average number of 438 is a little bit better. We're going to do it also for heavy. So now, what values do you guys need to have to break it? Who's found the breaking point yet? 1,000 concurrency still breaks?
No, it still works.
Oh, still works?
We broke at 220, above 220.
Has anybody managed to get higher than above 2,000 concurrent requests? I don't think I could do it, actually. Yeah. Yeah. So if you start running into a sockets error, that's not the server going down per se. That's the server saying, I can't handle any more connections than this at once, period. It's not even to do with the load. So just from these basic steps, we've just increased our ability to handle anonymous page requests up to 200 some odd a second, depending on how big the page is. You know what, we need to, let me get you a mic because I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. Do you want to just use this one that's standing in the middle? Because that was actually a really good point.
I just want to mention that the transfer rate, which is displayed there, sometimes is the bottleneck first before the CPU comes up. If you compare it to the network interface your server will have at that moment.
Mm-hmm. That becomes an issue when you have really big amounts of traffic. So the part, so is everyone with me so far? I'm going to go back to the slides.
Yeah.
All right. So the part of our best practices setup that we haven't done yet is varnish. Varnish sits right at the front of the whole stack, and it keeps you from ever having to bootstrap Drupal. There are various ways of integrating Varnish with Drupal, but it's important to know that they are all optional. Varnish works perfectly well as what we call a dumb cache, a system that is not at all integrated with Drupal, that Drupal doesn't really particularly know about. Varnish likes, well, a good Varnish configuration keeps everything in memory. It's saving just static HTML files, but it's all coming out of RAM, which means it's super fast. So we're going to start with just a very basic Varnish configuration, and then we're going to show you how to make Varnish sit up and dance. Varnish has actually quite a complicated, well, no, it has quite a simple language for determining exactly how to treat each kind of request. We're going to, actually Ernest is going to do a lot of it. It's going to be walking you through how to create your own Varnish configuration file. So the first thing is out of the box, the way Varnish is configured when you just install it on your server is not optimal. We are going to modify some of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually configure Varnish so Varnish is listening on port 8080 because that's convenient for us to test with. In a normal production environment, you would make Apache run on port 8080 and Varnish on 80 that handles all of normal people's web requests. And you can see the complete configuration in this root stuff etc sysconfig Varnish, but we can also do this all together. Everyone see the file name? So this is the file that controls the options for how to start the Varnish program on the server. Oh. Now this configuration file is reasonably well commented. It's not too difficult to understand what is going on. What's most important for us in this demonstration, we want to change the listen port so that it's 8080, because that's what my examples use, and that's what's forwarded on your computer. In a production site, you would actually use this option above, varnish listen address, and specify exactly the IP address and port that you want to listen on, to make sure that it's only listening exactly for the sites that you want. In this case, we're safe to just use listen port 8080. Varnish communicates with the backend site, if we're going to integrate with Drupal, for example, by opening up its own port and having the site connect to it. We're not going to use many of these options, so I'm going to leave these two as they are, but for people who are interested, you can telnet into port 6082 and play with it.
Can you tell again what this is? It's a special port for when you...
It's a special port for administrative actions. So for example, if you want to clear just one page out of the cache, you connect to this port and you issue a command that says kill the cache for this particular page.
There's actually a Drupal module that you can integrate into this as well that will clear cache. Whenever you clear caches, it'll use this port in order to communicate with it. So if you have a web farm, let's say like 8 or 9 webheads that are running all Varnish, you can clear all of them at the same time by just clearing your Drupal cache, and it'll go away.
Yeah. In this presentation, we're not going to be using the Varnish module. It is included in the installation, so if you want to enable it and play around with it, you're welcome to. Basically, it does the same thing that we've just done with APC and Memcache. It makes Drupal aware that there's this other caching layer that it can play with and send bins to. Actually, it's not a bad module, but you don't necessarily need it to get the really impressive speed improvements. So most of these options are just fine. A storage size of 1 gigabyte is fine for most servers if you have 2 gigs or more. There's nothing wrong with lowering that to 512 megs if you need to. This is a big one. By default, Varnish wants to store everything in a file. It creates one big file to be the cache. That's rarely the best option. We're going to change this to use memory. So you guys are going to follow along and see what I'm doing is I'm deleting the word file, and I'm changing it to malloc. Malloc. Always sounds like some kind of supervillain to me. I'm going to get rid of this variable that says varnish storage file. We don't need to have a storage file because it's going to be in RAM. And we can leave this varnish storage size. You can see that was defined right above here. I'll leave this up for a second so you guys can see.
So it's going to be segmented in RAM instead of just one big file on the disk?
Correct. Well, it actually makes one, what I remember is that it makes one big block in RAM. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
It doesn't segment it out.
Correct. So when the Varnish process starts, it goes to the Linux kernel, hey, I want to reserve a gig of RAM. And Linux will say yes or no to that. And if the case is yes, then it allocates it and it reserves it so no other program can actually use it. So it's the same thing as what you're doing on the file system. The benefit here is that memory is obviously a hell of a lot faster than anything that you're going to do on disk I/O. Even SSDs are slow compared to memory.
So again, we know there's a lot of information in this session, so we've tried to put everything that we can in the root directory under stuff. We have an explanation even of configuration for Varnish. Here you can see, I'll do it with the mouse. These are the modifications to sysconfig Varnish. You see that we actually recommend that you specify the listen address. Here's your storage size. This is that line that we just edited. Jason also likes to increase the time to live. It's not going to matter for our demonstration, but there's nothing wrong with increasing it to 300 if you like. Has everyone got their Varnish configuration file modified now? Good, you guys are speeding up. So we save it, and now we're going to start Varnish. Service Varnish restart in case it's already running. Anybody get any errors? Of course he did, it's Varnish. All right, we're going to make sure that this is running. This is using an out-of-the-box Varnish configuration file, which we will see is not actually too useful for Drupal, but it's useful enough for us to see how much faster this is. So we're going to go localhost. This time it's port 2288. And just make sure that if you're able to get a response here on port 2288, that means Varnish is running and you've done your configuration changes correctly. Okay?
When did you enter the 2288?
Here.
Yeah, but configuration.
Oh, so 2288 is a port on your actual local machine that is mapped to the virtual machine's port 8080. The question was, where do we make that configuration? That's actually in, oops, that's actually in VirtualBox.
Just wondering if I'm not getting a response from there, so...
Okay, so if you're not getting a response from there, that means you may have made a mistake in editing Varnish's config file. And actually, Jason will help you with that. Is everybody else managing to get a response? Sorry, just behind you, yeah. Varnish, the way it's set up now, yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to break. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Varnish is a generic system that works very well for, actually works very well in a lot of situations, but mostly because you can configure the hell out of it. You can actually see the big there's a visible difference here between the version that's running through Varnish and the version that's not. We have no sidebar blocks. That may be because I'm not logged in. Forms will break. Anything, yeah, actually there's a lot of stuff that's going to break. Yes, a question in the back? Oh, okay. Ernest, would you mind giving your hand? Yep.
I logged in with the Varnish thing, and I opened the heavy, the view.
Mm-hmm.
The first time, it took quite a while. That was because Varnish was actually creating and caching the things around.
Mm-hmm.
Because the second time, it actually opened the flash.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right. That's right. So the comment was just, you can really see the difference clicking around. I mean, that comes up instantaneously for me.
I mean, in the Varnish, you know,
Oh.
the first time I clicked heavy, it took quite a while, and then it started speeding up. So I can presume the first time it was actually creating it and storing it in RAM.
Yes, the first time you visit the page, it's going to create the cache and store it in RAM. We're going to do another A/B test, and we're just going to see completely out of the box with a stupid Varnish configuration what the difference is. Jason, we have another person with some issue here. So we're running this from inside the virtual machine. Note that the port number is different because we're inside the virtual machine. We want to make sure this goes through Varnish. So make sure to include that :8080. Raise your hand if you can see the difference. Not in the response you get. Only one person sees a difference? 2? 3? What kind of numbers are you getting? How many page hits per second? Just call it out. 2,500? Anybody got higher than that? 4,300? I'm sorry, sir, you've been beat. 4,604. This is not surprising. When we say Varnish is amazing, oh my God, Varnish, use Varnish, this is why. We just went from 35 page loads per second to upwards of 4,000, certainly upwards of 3,500. That's running on a virtual machine on your own computer. That's without a ton of resources to work with. I'm going to run it on mine so you can see what it looks like, just because I find that fun. 5,000, say it again? 5,138. I love this game. Oh, oops, wrong port. So the first time it's going to take a second, and then it loads. The numbers shouldn't make a difference, actually. Let me try on just the front page. $2,000? I'm really disappointed. Come on, Varnish. You can do better. 4,100? So now, what values do you need to break this? Go ahead and try it. I want you to take down your machine, please. This is why we have a virtual machine running.
I'm still fine at 10K.
You're still good at 10K concurrency? Yeah, you'll find concurrency has a bigger impact when we're looking for these sort of issues. Yeah, I'm still having no problem with 1,000 concurrency.
1,000 concurrency with 10K everything is fine.
Ah, yeah, and now I can't handle this many connections at once. Yes?
What if you get a Varnish connection program from the Drupal status report?
From the Drupal status report? Did you enable the Varnish module?
Yes.
That's why. It's the same thing as with Memcache and APC, that it's not just about enabling the module, you have to actually configure a bit in settings.php. Yeah. Questions? So you don't see any effect? Let me have a look. It is. The question is the limit of the sockets configurable? Yes, that's a system limit, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to figure that you're cool at 4,000 hits a second. If you have higher load than that, then you need to phone Jason.
I cannot go any higher. It's it throws an error immediately. Too many
Yeah. If once you get that socket error, try restarting Varnish.
It seems that we have a problem with Varnish not increasing any pages per second.
Okay.
Not doing any effect.
Okay, good, because we're gonna deal with that problem now. So the question was that we're having trouble because it looks like Varnish isn't doing anything. We're not getting anything faster. I mentioned this isn't an exact science, right? The technical term for this is that Varnish is a bitch to debug. It's really hard. And I'm gonna walk you through a couple of ways of looking to figure out why Varnish is not caching. For the time being, though, I'm gonna have to have Jason and Ernest come and actually help you because it's too difficult to do in a general situation. Right. So this is where we start to see the difference between the results that you get from AB and the results that you'll get from an actual web browser. AB is just doing a dumb connection. It has no cookies, it has no JavaScript, it downloads the image files, but it doesn't deal with any of those kind of display layer issues. If you actually have real-world user traffic, it's not going to hit the cache very often. This is because of the way Varnish deals with cookies. Does everybody here know what a cookie is? Not this kind, the other cookie. So I like both of them. Right, Varnish assumes that any time a site sets a cookie on your computer, it's because it wants to customize something on the page, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to keep that page, to serve that page from cache. Very often cookies are keeping track of logged in users, but it can also just keep track of your history. You don't have to be logged into Google, for example, for Google to customize your results page. It just sets a cookie and it knows. With Drupal, we set quite a few cookies. Anytime there's the possibility of having JavaScript on a page, we set a cookie on your we set a cookie that says, yes, this browser has JavaScript. Anytime we use table drag, lots of forms use cookies, and any of those cases are going to cause Varnish not to cache. This is a bit tricky to test with A/B. We can't use the same setup that we were using before, and I'm going to show you how to what we call spoof a session. We're going to have A/B act as if it's a logged-in user. But first, I'm going to show you how to tell that whether Varnish is caching or not. Now for this, we're going to use a tool that's called Varnish Log. Varnish comes with a handful of tools like this to see what's going on. It doesn't make it any easier to debug. But Varnish Log, Varnish Top, Varnish Stat, there's actually a whole bunch of them, and every one of them is extremely configurable. Most of these I'm going to let you discover on your own, but Varnish Log is just way too important. This is what the output of Varnish Log looks like. That's one page request, and it goes on for way more pages than this. I'd like you just type Varnish Log in your terminal. One word, and hit enter, and then go to your browser and try and load something through port 2288. I have an advanced simulation for what this experience is like. The best part is trying to recover your dignity afterwards. Right, so have you guys all typed Varnish Log and you can see what this output is like? It's
still going.
Yeah, and that was one page load? If you do it with A/B, it's way worse. It's one of those warble garble dogs. Right, so Varnish Log comes with a lot of filtering options so that you don't have to deal with the whole hose. This is a URL that's really worth bookmarking. I don't know why I didn't think to shorten this so it would be easier. One of the other issues that makes Varnish so hard to debug is that they change the arguments for things like Varnish Log and Varnish Stat between versions. So like we're running Varnish 3.03, 3.01, the arguments that I'm going to show you won't work. 2.0, they won't work. I think 3.1 dev, it's a completely other set of arguments. And not only does that make it really hard for me, it also makes it really hard for you if you're trying to Google for what the right arguments should be. Let's see. So, oh, sorry, we have 3.04. Right. So the key arguments that we're going to use, here you can see, actually, can you guys see that? It's a bit small on my screen too. And I chose a stupid font. The first one is either -C or -B. And that tells it to filter out and only show you connections with the client, that's your user out there in userland, or -B, the backend, which is your internal Apache server. The second option that's really useful is -I, and that filters out, that says, I want you to include only these tags. So maybe you only want to see what the URL is, maybe you only want to see what Varnish's decision is, cache or don't cache. You can filter down to those tags. And the last one is -M, which I particularly hate because for me it works really inconsistently, but that says only show me responses where this tag matches this regular expression. So for example, you'll notice if you actually read through that Varnish Firehose, that when you load a page, Varnish actually looks at all of your URLs, not just the one the person requested, but also the CSS file and any images that are going to be there and all the secondary crap that gets loaded. Varnish gets to see all of those, and it's nice and handy to say, no, I just want to see the basic page. So this is a Varnish log string that I would like you guys to try. Oh, that's way too small for you guys, isn't it? Here. No, you know what actually would be really good is I'm just going to type it in myself, and then you guys can see it. That easier to see? Yeah. So what we have here, we have Varnish log, easy enough. -C, show me only the information related to a client request. -I want you to include these tags. So I chose these tags because these are ones that give you a nice summary of each request. VCL call and VCL return are what Varnish decides to do, whether it decides to cache or try and get it from the back end. Object status is when it tries to get it from the cache. Is it stale? Does it exist in cache? RX URL is the URL that was received, that was requested. And I forget what RX request is. Jason, you remember what RX request is? Oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And
Yeah.
so it's either get or post or whatever the HTTP verb was. I've also filtered it -M RX URL is /heavy.
Yeah.
That's correct. So this should not show you any output when you go to the home page. It should only show you output when you go to /heavy. Let's see if it works for me this time. The same command, copy and pasted, sometimes works for me and sometimes doesn't. Absolutely drives me nuts. Yes, a question? Varnish will cache absolutely anything that gets passed from the back end. That includes images, CSS files, somewhat problematically large file downloads. You don't really want 800 megs of your Varnish cache to be used up by an ISO file. Right? That's not particularly useful.
Campbell, it seems like a common issue is that whenever some people, at least half of the people I saw, it's actually not even going into Varnish at all. It's actually just passing. So it's not actually getting cached somewhere if it's a cookie.
Well, no, this is what I wanted to show, actually.
Yeah. So everybody I was talking to, this is the part that is basically going to hopefully fix what you're having problems with.
So that's why it's not caching.
Correct. Right.
Yes. The AB should have been caching, but...
It wasn't.
All right, so we'll figure out why not. It's good. That's actually what we're here for. So you can see that the fire hose, for those two requests, that fire hose is a lot filtered now. This is much more drinkable. You see the session open, that this is a get. There's the URL. VCL call. So it receives the request and pass. Pass means I'm not going to try caching this. I'm going to pass this to the back end. Hash means this is actually how it compares to make sure that this is how it compares to see what's going on in the back end. We don't need to worry about it for today. Pass is the call, and then fetch hit for pass. Fetch is the operation that actually pulls the data from your Apache backend. Hit for pass means not only is this a pass, not only are we going to ask the backend, we're going to cache the fact that it's a pass so we don't have to look that up every time. So every time automatically you go to /heavy, it's not even going to bother analyzing the request. It's just going to pull the fact that it needs to be a pass out of cache and send you to Apache.
Maybe you answered that. Sorry, maybe
It's okay.
why is it not caching this page?
I have not answered. The question is, why is it not caching this page? Does anybody have any ideas why it would not be caching this page? Yeah, cookies. The right answer is probably for 80% of you, cookies. For the people who have problems, we may be finding another one. I love it that we're all in the same VM.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the best we could do.
We're all using the same machine, and
exactly.
for half of us, we're going to get a different response.
Exactly.
This is kind of the yeah. This is what you pay people like Black Mesh to deal with for you, so you don't have to cry yourself to sleep at night. So this gave us a really nice, easy way to look at that fire hose and say, oh, shoot, we're not actually caching when it's a real browser request. Excuse me. And even worse, Varnish is now caching the fact that it's not a real browser request, or that it shouldn't cache on a real browser request. This is where we're going to enter into Varnish configuration land. So so one of the things that we could have altered when we were doing that Varnish daemon configuration file is what file to look at for the specific logic about how to decide whether to cache something or not. We didn't change it, so it's in etc Varnish. Actually, you know what? I just thought of this, but one thing that might help people who are having trouble with AB not getting cache, we have the configuration file in root's home directory. You could just try copying that.
Some people overwrote it because they weren't. Yeah, make sure you edit the right Varnish in these config files. They sit in Etsy, not in stuff, because Varnish looks in Etsy sysconfig, for instance. Varnish for getting its config files. There are a couple people were editing the stuff in stuff /Etsy/sysconfig/Varnish, and obviously those won't take. So make sure you put the leading slash on these commands.
That leading slash is the important one. I'm just going to make sure I keep forgetting where I am in my slides here. Oh yeah, this one's appropriate for where we are. Right. This is Varnish hell. It's an accurate description of your job, right?
99% of the day, yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what sysadmins do.
All right. So we're going to edit the file default.vcl. We call them VCLs for short. That's got to be one of the acronyms that a bunch of people didn't get at the beginning. That is in /etc/varnish. So this is the VCL that actually comes with Varnish. Yeah, it's all commented out. Ooh, man, sorry, mine uses the same backend default at the top. So the only thing that it does is say we have one backend server, one Apache server. It's running on 127.0.0.1. That's localhost, and it's running on port 80. That's it. The default Varnish logic is if there is a cookie, don't cache it. We mentioned that already, and that's a big part of why we're having trouble. When you load a site through the browser, Drupal sets a bunch of cookies. Well, 1, 2, or 3 cookies, depending. So we're going to modify the heck out of this. Jason, do you have a copy of my modified one up somewhere?
I do.
Or, you know what, it's all right. It's not a secret that I'm going to be taking this from my template version. Because this can be such a pain in the ass, everybody saves a version of their configuration file, and most people just use it like a template. Mine is in your root directory, stuff, ets, varnish. So you could just copy this VCL file into place. I'm going to go through it one bit at a time and explain what the logic is that we're applying. You can see right away, this is my VCL, this is Varnish's VCL. Oh, let me zoom in a bit. Yeah, my VCL, Varnish's VCL. This is in the home directory under stuff, etc, varnish. Varnish.txt actually has Black Mesh's VCL, which is a little bit different from mine, and it has more explanation.
And it's worth being said here that there is no, as Campbell said earlier, there is no one VCL that solves all problems. Ours is, you know, sometimes a little less dense than some others. You know, obviously Ernest, when he goes through his, is going to be crazy. You know, you can do a lot of other things inside of it that we don't do. So, but it's a good starting place. And same thing with Campbell's. It's a good starting place. It'll get Drupal's cookies. It'll be, you know, it'll allow Google to pass through. It'll allow other stuff to actually happen. So,
I'm going to put the path to this Campbell version up again so that everyone can see, if you haven't been able to find it. And you'll see when Ernest gets up to talk, if we end up having time for Ernest to get up and talk, that the way that the VICL that Economist uses is structured quite differently. Though the logic isn't all that different. All right, has everybody found the both VICL files? All right. I'm going to go to edit it here. Sorry? Okay, so the first section here is declaring backends. Varnish can actually handle having multiple servers behind it. You declare them as backends. In most cases, when we're just on a single server, you don't need to worry about modifying this. But if you had 3 or 4 servers behind it, you might also say backend.
How would it know where to forward the request?
How would it know where to forward each request? Oh. It's IP7. You probably haven't heard about it yet. It's a little bit hipster. So the question was then, when you have multiple backends, how does it know where to forward the request? You actually will have a function that is called a director. So I have to think. It's difficult. I'm at DrupalCon. You have a function that's called a director. Most of the time, you'll have it just alternate.
Which I guess is just a switch.
Yeah, it can be as simple as a switch. A lot of the time, the backend actually, you can also set up status checks. So Varnish makes sure that the servers are alive before sending anything to it. The whole director thing, Varnish can become a complete load balancer for you. But this is a really simple version, so we're not bothering with a director. One really popular version of the VICL template file you can find, Lullabot keeps it on their public wiki. Make sure you get the version for Varnish 3. I think I mentioned before that Varnish breaks a ton of stuff between versions, so make sure you get the one for the right version you're using. It has an example director in it.
How important is the latency between Varnish and Apache?
So the question is, how important is the latency between Apache and Varnish? It's only going to, it's only important if it's a really huge latency. The only time it's going to matter is when Varnish has to ask Apache for information, and we want to minimize that as much as possible. We would rather be able to handle 4,000 hits a second than 400. Does that answer your question?
I can use it in the same data center, for example,
Yeah.
but not in a different country.
Yeah, you could use it in a different country as long as you don't have to go back to Apache very often. It's fine. And to be honest, latencies, the kind of improvements that we're looking at in caching, 100 milliseconds is not going to make, it's not going to make an enormous difference.
and if you really think about it, Varnish is just a poor man's CDN, right? So if you go out to Akamai, you know, Limelight, whoever, and get a CDN, that's all they're doing is they're just caching your site. So in this case, you're selectively caching your site. You're not just doing a static content, or in case of Akamai, you can do dynamic content as well. But the latency part, Akamai has stuff all over the world, right? So, and they use GeoIP to grab you to the right location. In this case, you know, your origin servers, which would be this, if you had Akamai or something in front of it, could be anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. It could be in Australia, and you could be serving someone in the States, and it wouldn't matter because they're still going to, you know, that query coming from Akamai back to the origin to grab is going to be really slow, but as soon as it's in Akamai, it's going to be fast, is kind of the thought. But if you're not caching 100% of your page, which in most times you're not going to, as we're going to see, or as we're seeing now with the cookies, then, you know, you're going to have still that latency in there to basically load that initial page up so Varnish can serve it to the end.
So as you're, oh, another question?
Just follow up the question. If you have Promise and CDN,
Yeah, so we deal with this a lot. So
Just repeat the question.
yeah, the question is, do you use a CDN to query Varnish, or do you use a CDN to query Apache directly if you have Varnish in front of it? So as I was talking before earlier, you want to cache in layers, right? So if you have a CDN out in front, you want the CDN to talk to Varnish, you want Varnish to talk to Apache. Keep that layer there, because if the CDN disappears, you still have Varnish protecting your site from getting onslaughted from just a wall of traffic. Also, whenever Akamai goes and grabs stuff from origin, it's not nice. It's almost like a spider hitting your site. It's going to smash, it's just a large wall, because they have thousands of servers sitting there, maybe getting queried for your data. If all those TTLs expire within a couple seconds of each other, all of those those cache servers in that CDN are now querying your Varnish servers directly. So the first one will be slow, but every one after that is going to be fast, because Varnish is going to serve that stuff. And if you didn't have Varnish sitting there, Apache's going to have to chew through all of those requests coming through, just like all those unique users hitting you.
So this is getting into some next level stuff. And I really like architecting cache structures. I know Jason does too. So we're happy to sit down with you, and it actually helps to diagram this out. But for the time being, we should keep going in this kind of stepwise motion. This the VICL is complicated enough to understand. So a VICL is divided into sections based on the big operations that Varnish does. There are actually several sections. The only ones that we're going to particularly care about are VCL receive and VCL fetch. I mean, actually, the explanation gets shortened quite nicely if you just take out a bunch of vowels, because this is Unix, so we expect to be able to read without vowels. Everyone understands the difference between VCL receive and VCL fetch? Good. Varnish can make, yeah, that's right. So in each of those stages, Varnish is going to make a call about how to handle the request. And I'm going to read this out because it is completely illegible. The first call is pass. We discussed what pass is. That means I'm not going to cache this. It's not appropriate to cache it. I'm going to hand it off to the backend server. The second is lookup. We also discussed that. That means, yeah, this looks like it's cacheable. I'm going to look it up in my cache and see if I've got anything for it. If it looks up and finds there's nothing in the cache, then it will get a copy from the backend server.
And cache.
Sorry?
And cache it.
And cache it, that's right. Lookup means this is cacheable. If I've got a copy, serve it from cache. If I don't, get it out of the backend, keep it in cache, and then serve it. It's a good distinction to make. And the last one is pipe. Does anybody know what the pipe does? Can you imagine from the name what pipe might do? It's a trick question. Actually, or can you read well enough, because this is a terrible color? Yeah. So the difference between, it sends it through to Apache. The difference between this and pass is pipe says to Varnish, close your eyes and just pass whatever Apache gives you on. Don't cache it. Don't store a record that it has to go through. Just pass it directly through. You use pipe for things like large files. We talked about how problematic it could be to have an ISO file taking up your entire Varnish cache. You would want to just pipe that, because it's not a big deal to have that served out of the files.
And what would pass do in contrast to that?
So pass means analyze and check the back end. And when it comes from the back end, analyze again and send it on. It's like pipe is like, ignore the rest of the rules. I don't care what I've said in my configuration file, just pipe it.
So both won't cache, but pipe will just be faster because it will skip the two analysis phases.
Yeah. Jason, am I wrong?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Whew. Man, that's good.
So why use pass? Why not just pipe everything in pass?
Because if you want to do pipes, you actually have to put those in the config file, so in your VCL. So what Varnish basically does is if it's something that's uncacheable, let's say like these cookies, for instance, we're not caching cookies. Those pieces are actually getting passed because Varnish doesn't know how to deal with it. It's dynamic content, right? So if you're trying to pipe something, so basically that content is something a varnish can't deal with, so it just passes it. So, but it has to do that analysis to figure that out, both incoming and outgoing. In a pipe, you're basically explicitly saying in your VICL, hey, don't varnish, don't look at this, just pass this request, HTTP request directly onto Apache. Whenever Apache replies to you, don't look at it again, just stream the bits as they come out of Apache directly to the client, and just acts as a proxy, essentially. So that's the difference. With Apache, you don't have to do any VICL.
It is a gray difference.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at the VICL. Rather than have you guys copy pasta everything that I've got up here, we will ultimately just copy my VICL into place, but I am going to explain what the structure is. And yeah, thank you. And you have to keep in mind that big structure. So first we have a section for VICL receive. This is what we're going to do with the information that we get from the client. So the very first thing we're going to do is make sure that the backend is healthy. Make sure the backend is responding okay to pings. If it's not, don't bother with anything else and just serve it a cache page. You'll notice as a shorthand for getting it out of cache, we often will unset cookies. This is because Varnish's default behavior is if there are no cookies, just use the cache. We could just as easily here say return lookup. Yep.
What would happen if, well, I mean, obviously you get some error, but how would Varnish react if the backend wasn't healthy and there wasn't something to cache? I guess it would show just
Yep.
501 or something.
Yeah, it'll give you an error, and actually in this default VICL, I define a nicer looking error page and some nicer looking default behavior. Yep. Scroll down to the bottom of the file and you'll see where it is. I'm not going to talk about it much, but the difference, can anybody tell me what the difference would be between unsetting cookies and just saying directly return lookup?
Well, it looks like it continues if you unset the cookies, and then you can do some other decisions.
The difference is that if you just unset cookies, it's going to continue processing this logic, and it's going to continue trying to decide it's still possible to say, no, don't cache this under any circumstances. Return lookup just ends processing and looks up in the cache right now.
So it resembles more the ICE logic that we discussed before.
Yeah, something like that. That's right. Resembles more.
Does it remove the cookie from the request completely so the patient doesn't get it at all?
Yes. The question was, will it actually remove the cookie from the request entirely so Apache won't see it? And the answer is yes. Apache is dead anyway. If you unset cookies, logged in users won't work. In fact, last week I was on Skype with Ernest and he was saying that they were having a huge denial of service attack, and one of the mitigation strategies is just unset all cookies, everyone's anonymous, everyone's going through Varnish now, and then we can gradually allow exceptions through. Another question?
In the health check, if you don't unset the cookie, will it also depend on your hash configuration as far as whether they return?
Yes. Yes, the question was, will it also depend, if you don't unset the cookie, will it also depend on your hash configuration? Yes. You can actually also enter custom logic into the hash configuration section. We're not going to do that here today because it's a bit of an edge case. But yes, it will depend on how it hashes things. So set the grace period. Allow the backend to serve up stale content if it is responding slowly. Pipe these paths directly to Apache for streaming. This is commented out by default in my configuration, but it might be useful. This is exactly the kind of situation we were talking about. If the URL is admin content backup migrate export, if you guys don't know about the backup migrate module, it creates a database dump of your site. There's no reason for us to cache that. So if the URL looks like it's coming from backup migrate, then just pipe it. Questions so far? Good.
Can you have a regular expression there for the path?
Yes. All of these paths are regular expressions. Well, when you have the tilde rather than an equals, it's a regular expression.
This is with the VICL file.
Yes, this is inside the VICL file.
The grace period, exactly what's that? What's 6 hours representing?
It's to say that if the backend is responding slowly, then it's okay for us to serve stale cache. So cache that should have expired, but we still keep it around. This is actually an important concept to get for D8. We have one of the big cache improvements is that just because a piece of cached content is expired, doesn't mean we get rid of it. Because, you know, who knows, maybe the back end's going to go down and that old copy of the front page would come in real handy, right? So expiry is separate from purge, and this lets you serve expired content. Okay. I'm not going to explain the logic, copy and paste this part. The important part is that we set a header saying X forwarded 4. This is the most common way to indicate that you have a front end in front of Apache, so that Apache knows the request isn't actually coming from localhost. If you don't have this section, what Apache is going to see is, oh, localhost wants to load the front page again. And in all of your logs, everybody's requests are all going to be coming from localhost. That causes issues. Maybe you want to geo-IP locate, or maybe your log files are actually useful to you. So we set X forwarded 4. You actually have to set an option in settings.php for Drupal to respect that. It's already there. You just have to uncomment it. It's well commented in settings.php itself, so we're not going to bother with that. But this is a good standard thing to have. Do not cache these paths. So you have a series of regular expressions. Notice that we have the double pipes to say or. So if we're going to status.php or update.php or an admin page, there's no reason for us to cache an admin page. We don't want to cache AJAX responses. So if the path is any of those things, we're going to return a pass. The login page shouldn't be a problem. You'll see a bit further down, if somebody is already a logged in user, we're not caching for them anyway. But yes, it's a good question. The question was, what about /user? Why wouldn't you cache that? Question at the back. That's a good question. I mean, you could use pipe. Is there a good reason not to use pipe there? I can't think of one.
Maybe if you pass the responses cast to always pass.
Yeah, it will cache the fact that it should be a pass response.
Yeah, that's basically it. That would be my only two cents to that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could pipe it, but
It will skip the if, just that?
no, it will still go through that if statement. But the difference is if Varnish won't actually go through, if you did the pipe, it actually wouldn't evaluate the responses coming back. So in this case, I mean, you could certainly do it, but I would rather Varnish know that it's not supposed to, like I want it to know that metadata is still there, so that it caches that metadata. And then as it's pushing it back, it goes, oh, I've already seen this before, I know not to just do this. And it just keeps going. With a pipe, it doesn't know anything about it. It has to make that evaluation every time.
All right, so below this section, we have a lot of things that I have in here because they're handy for me to keep around. I don't have to figure out the syntax again every time. And we have this commented out. So this is, do not allow outside access to cron or install.php. This means that rather than having Drupal deal with the fact that you're not allowed to run cron or install.php, we can do that in Varnish. This is handy specifically if somebody knows that you're running Drupal and they're hammering the hell out of your site. And we would just say, just return a 404. So it looks for them like there is no cron.php. Actually, who was it? We were talking about this the other day, that there are times when you're just getting hammered by a bunch of by hackers, and they tend to be in the same IP range, and you can just take that whole IP range and say, no, if it's from this IP range, give them a 404.
Yeah.
On every page, as long as it's come from this IP.
And you can actually even go one step further and look at user agents. You can look at URLs. You can any regex you want to put in, anything you can think of in the HTTP header, right? You can filter through Varnish and return anything you want. So you can truly manipulate anything that this user's seeing just by searching some key regex. Now, granted, that happens for everybody. So like what we use it for is denial of service mitigation. So someone's beating a site, Chinese web crawler, for instance, maybe be beating the site, and I know that the user agent is the same on every one. Guess what? That user agent is now getting, a 404, or it's getting something else that I define. And now now Varnish is dealing with that, my site is now operating correctly for everyone else.
Yeah, generally you wouldn't want to do that on a long-term basis, but it's a great way to protect yourself if you need to. Yep. You're about to ask about this next line, right?
No. I get what if you make some kind of change. I guess you're gonna start Varnish, right?
Yeah, but it's pretty immediate. Yeah, I mean, if you're getting denial of service and getting your server handed to you, it doesn't matter at that point. You're down anyway at that point.
Do you have acceptance to remove this stuff?
To remove.
Like for instance, if you have Google Analytics and then basically you have this, well, Fathers doesn't know if actually this send test what you, right? If you have like Google Analytics or you click link from Facebook and the company have advertisement there, it will basically have this metadata behind the URL. The partner thinks it's, oh, this is not the same page, so you will not catch it because it's the same front page.
So the question is, if the URL has extra arguments attached to it, this happens, for example, if you're tracking an ad campaign, and maybe you just make sure that instead of going to the front page, you go to the front page and argument equals 1. Can Varnish recognize the fact that that should be the same URL? Out of the box, it actually uses the complete URL string, I think, but you can certainly use the regex to look for that. That would be something you do in the hash function, likely.
This may be a topic for another conversation, but is it possible to configure Varnish to be able to throttle based on IP address? So if it sees a box coming, on a frequent basis, as long as the IP for a period of time or anything?
Yes. So the question was, is it possible to throttle, to have Varnish issue temporary blocks like that? I don't do it in this file. Do you have a particular configuration that you use for that? I mean,
No,
you wouldn't slow them down.
Yeah, I don't throttle. I mean, it's either block or not.
Oh, sorry, I mean block that IP for a period of time.
Oh yeah, you can absolutely do that. I mean, you can do includes inside of here as well. So just do an include in some file, and you can do a regex with set or something like that in a cron job. Say that, hey, in an hour I want this to be gone. Set it out, and off it goes. It's gone. Exactly. Or you have it remove it out. Like what we do is this is kind of a little bit off topic, but you can create files dynamically of IP addresses that are hitting your site out of here through the HTTP header, and you can filter based upon those IPs, and then feed those back into Varnish. So you can use those files, those include files, dynamically, and you can actually restart it as well to basically feed those stuff back in. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, Vickle is a complete, either an enormous configuration language or a reasonably complete scripting language. So anything that comes through in the HTTP headers, you can take really advanced action based on it. The next section here, we say, all right, if the request URL, this is a regex, so the simple explanation of it is, if it ends in .pdf, .asc, .dat, .text, .doc, then it's okay. To cache it. It doesn't matter if the user is authenticated. It doesn't matter what cookies they've got. It's not going to matter because they're just downloading a damn file. This particular list is files that tend to be quite small, so it's not a problem, and it's faster to serve them out of memory, but you can modify this list as you like. This is now the entertaining part, how we can tell the difference between somebody who's logged in and somebody who just has a cookie set because you've got Google Analytics or something like that. Excuse me. So this is another part that most people would just copy and paste. What we do is we use simple modifications to the text string that are cookies to make it easy for us to regex tell when there is a session cookie or other cookies. So actually this explanation is not bad. Put a semicolon in the front of the whole string. All your cookies are sent as just one string, it's one header. We remove all the spaces that appear after semicolons. That's not step 2. Step 3 is that we match the cookies that we want to keep. adding the space that we removed a moment ago. So a cookie that begins with SESS and then has any string of characters after it, or SSESS and then any string afterwards, those are Drupal session cookie structures. Or if it's a cookie that says no cache, then we want to keep it, and we're going to replace it. We're going to have a space after. We're going to include a space in front of it, even though we just got rid of all the rest of the spaces. And then we're going to go through all of it and say, okay, anything that has no space after the semicolon, get rid of it. Then we can say remove all spaces and semicolons from the beginning and end because we don't need them. That's just convenience. And what that means is that it's really easy to have an if statement that says, okay, well, the only cookies that are remaining are the session cookies, secure session, or no cache. So if the cookie string is empty, unset it, because an empty string actually still counts as being set. Unset it, and you're going to get a cached page. Otherwise, if there is anything left over in that cookie string, pass it back to the backend. This, I mentioned that it's complicated, and this is a copy-paste that a lot of people do. If there are particular cookies that you want to let through, a really common one might be has_JS. You add it to this regular expression. Or you call Jason or me, and we help you figure it out.
Hey, Cam?
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe tag team the rest, because it's I don't want people to miss our coffee break, and it's the 3:15.
Awesome.
So just for you guys, I know I need coffee, but
jeez, it's 3:15.
yeah, I can go through mine real quick because mine's going to also explain the rest of the Bickle and imports.
That's a perfectly excellent idea.
Anyone who has questions afterwards, we can definitely kind of work through each problem because everyone's got a particular situation that they'd like to handle. Does that sound good to the group, or what do you guys think? No? No?
All right, so the only step that you need to do to make sure you can test this stuff on your box is going to be just copy our default Bickle to Varnish. And restart Varnish. Good idea.